Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Welcome. We're so happy that you have joined us for this really special and unique conversation to celebrate the upcoming release of the hotly anticipated documentary Aggie with, of course, Kat Gund, the filmmaker, and artist Julie Mehretu. I want to also say thank you to Lolita Fierro and Megan Garvin. They are the ones doing the magic behind the curtain here to make it all run so seamlessly. And gosh, I think this is maybe Zoom number 5 of public programming from Art21 over the course of the spring and summer. And I don't take it for granted how challenging it can be to host online events. And I feel really fortunate to have the Agile team that we do doing the work at Art21. We have an amazing group of folks with us here today. Thanks for devoting your time and to tuning in to watch the special advanced screening. I don't think we've ever had as much success gathering so many amazing people IRL, so we're really happy to see you all. The program today is going to last just about an hour. I am going to kick off the conversation with Kat and Julie with a series of questions to open up a conversation around the film. Before we get into that, we're going to watch a very short but heartfelt open from Aggie herself, tailored and made especially for us in this room. Towards the latter half of the hour, we're going to have an opportunity to open up the questions to the group. So I will make mention of that. Feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat. In fact, you can do that now, or you can do it at any point over the course of the next half hour or so. To begin, I want to give some proper introductions to the two powerhouse creatives that we have contributing to today's conversation. The first of whom is Kat Gund. Kat is the founder of Aubin Pictures and an Emmy-nominated producer, director, writer, and activist. Her media work focuses on strategic and sustainable social transformation, arts and culture, HIV/AIDS, and reproductive health and the environment. If you visit the website for Aubin Pictures, the tagline explains what Kat's work is all about. It reads, "Illuminating Change," which I think is such a good tagline. Her most recent projects, Beyond Aggie, which you saw today, includes Dispatches from Cleveland. That's a 5-chapter documentary that looks at the police murder of 12-year-old Tamir Rice. I highly recommend this film for anyone who wants to learn more about the U.S. prison system. I find it a perfect complement, in fact, to many of the themes that we uncover in Aggie's film, both in terms of Cleveland, but in terms of social justice more broadly. Kat's past films include Chavela, a documentary about the life of iconic Latin American gender-bending diva Chavela Vargas, as well as the titles America, Born to Fly, What's on Your Plate, Motherland, Afghanistan, and On Hostile Ground, among several other incredible films. Her films have screened around the world in festivals, theaters, museums, and schools on PBS, the Discovery Channel, and the Sundance Channel. I believe that Aggie, the film, debuted at Sundance this year, just before COVID hit. So we're really happy to be able to expand the audience for this film. Now, Julie, quickly. Julie Mehretu needs really no introduction. Some of you perhaps noted that last week, Julie was voted Time's 100 People of the Year. Congrats, Julie. That's pretty major. She's also a recent MacArthur Fellow. Julie's work you will know well from Art21 Films, as well as amazing museum presentations around the world. Her recent work has begun to incorporate photographic images from broadcast media, which depict conflict, injustice, and social unrest. And while many of these themes were encoded in earlier works, I think you see it much more present in the new body of work that Julie has been investigating. The graphic images, they act as sort of intellectual and compositional points of departure, ultimately occluded from the canvas through layers and layers of gesture, yet that they remain sort of phantom presence in this highly abstract gestural composition. Julie's practice in painting, drawing, and printmaking equally asserts the role of art to provoke thought and reflection. Art21 has had the pleasure of following Julie throughout her career since 2009, when she was featured in season 5 of Art in the 21st Century. We just debuted season 10 2 weeks ago. And for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to see, tune in on Friday night, 10 p.m. Season 10's program Borderlands airs on PBS, or you can watch it on any streaming apps following. our most recent film with Julie aired back in 2017, where we followed the making of her monumental work for SF MoMA, and Art21 was very, very happy to honor Julie at our first and only ever gala back in 2018. So with that, I want to welcome, well, first, I guess we want to watch, and we're going to screen share here. We're going to watch Aggie's own open and welcome for the film, and then I will follow up with an invitation to have Kat and Julie join our conversation.
Welcome to this movie. I wish we were all together to be able to enjoy it, but I want to say Art21, I used to be strongly associated with them because Susan Solins was a great friend, and I followed her in her myriad organizations until she finally rested on Art21. She was an extraordinary leader, and she wanted to go every place she could to film people that were artists that were of particular note. There's so many divergent artists that she's that they've latched onto and are doing films about. So I hope you enjoy this film by my daughter, and I hope it carries messages which you will be able to use and will use, I'm sure, until the November elections. Catherine was glad to include excerpts from films that Art21 did in this film. You may recognize some of them. So thank you for allowing us to share those with you. And don't stop talking about justice with people in your circles. Don't stop agitating and organizing, marching and protesting. We can't let the momentum of this summer fade. Art moves us to act, but we need people like you to keep the spark going. We can create a more just world. This film shows us the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Aggie. I think it's a perfect place to start the conversation, and it was something that gets mentioned already in the chat. Jocelyn Denizio's comment about the very first thing that Aggie says on camera. And I already know the answer to this question, but Kat, I want to invite you in to this conversation. I mean, Aggie in these remarks makes clear this is not just a film about Aggie. This is a film with a message. But she says at the outset, you ask her what her hope for the film is. And she says very directly and pointedly and formidably, I hope that no one sees it.
I know, so, it was hard. It was hard. I mean, I'm glad she wanted to make that intro because she knows and cares about you and the organization, but also many of the people on the call. And I think, you know, anyone who's even heard of her knows that she doesn't like the spotlight, and she shuns any attention, and she deflects. And hopefully Julie will talk for a little bit about what it was like to actually be in conversation while we were filming. But you know, she's somebody who I had to convince it was worth making a movie about her, but I didn't at the same time want to undermine one of the most important reasons why I believed that, which is that she would never want a movie made about her. So in the film, I spend so much energy filling in these sort of empty spaces and erasure, and her wit is very dry and often about what's not said. And so I was lucky with these moments in the back of the car. I don't know if anyone watched till the end of the credits, because there's another one where I say, so now what do you think of the movie? And she says, the movie's great. What movie? Okay, welcome to my world. But, you know, I feel like throughout the film, I keep trying to get her to share some of what we love about her and to talk, as you hear me say, I keep trying to get her to talk, but she's really, you know, not a linear speaker. And I think that that's part of why she and Julie have such a beautiful relationship. If you look at Julie's work, sometimes it's hard to know where to enter, how to access, where it starts and where it ends. And I feel like that's what it's like talking to Aggie. So, but it's very satisfying once you're in there. You know, there's an incredible internal coherence to what's going on in the work and in Aggie, in Julie's work, and in Aggie, the person. Now I have to call her Aggie the person all the time because it's like Aggie the film or Aggie the person. So it was a challenge to make a movie.
You feel her ability to empathize when she's in the room with other people. So, but since you already mentioned it, Julie, like your questions for Aggie in this film are some of the most like intense. You ask about her mother. You ask about her, what I recall I think you asked about her, or what she wanted for herself in her life. Like you really went for it. And maybe you could share a little bit about your relationship with Aggie, and also to Kat's point, what it was like. Because we never hear her answers, really. So we not so much. I mean,
that's right. She never does answer.
She doesn't answer them completely. I don't think from my memory, I don't think she answered the questions. In fact, she deflected the questions a lot. And part of it is, I think there's this kind of deeply internalized humility about and kind of like effort to kind of undermine any aspect of like drive or desire. And I think from my understanding, I mean, it's so hard to have this conversation with you because you're her daughter, you know her so well, but from the way it comes across to me, she's her way of being in the world is not driven by a form of action that wants a type of reaction, but her way of being in the world is about community, being in communion and being in this form of in community. Speaking about that conversation we had with Frame the other day for front. But that's always been her, from what I understand, her capability of being in the world and coming from a particular position of privilege, coming from the family that she came from, coming from Cleveland in that family and being a woman in that family, being a girl, growing up a girl into a woman in that family. That's why I was really interested in how did she gain this kind of intense ground that she felt that she has and that so while Aggie's very commanding of that space, it's always in concert with everyone else. It's never this protected type of matronesque kind of space that is about giving to something else, but it's always this symbiotic kind of relationship of getting and giving and participating. And it's always in that participatory way that I think she behaves. So partially, I think her difficulty in answering those questions comes from that place, that she just is living and being, and this is how you be in when you go to church, when you're in communion, when you're in these contexts, and why whatever comes across her reality, she absorbs and brings into her world. So when art programs were cut out of schools, she had to find a way to invent, studio in a school, or same with Art for Justice. When she really understood what was happening in the contemporary carceral world, immediately she went to work. And that going to work is not a drive outside of how do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of each other?
I thought, Kat, you did such an incredible job presenting the conversations between artists like Julie and Aggie as if we were like a fly on the wall, because you get a sense of these relationships are pre-established. They are not really getting acted out on camera. Of course, they are acted out on camera a little bit. But I think that also does play into that, like what gets withheld, what we don't see, what the pre-existing relationships were before this moment in the spotlight, if you will. And I guess maybe this is really a question for Julie, like what was your pre-existing relationship with Aggie? I think it would be interesting for us to know.
Aggie's just such a generous person. Like I keep saying, but I met her through the Studio Museum and starting to show. And then little by little at all these various events that Aggie will come to, she's a supporter of almost everything in the arts in the city and in public culture. And at one point, one of the points where I feel like there were various points when we got closer, but I kept seeing her at dinners and we would sit with each other. And then at the Studio Museum Gala, she would invite a group of various artists to sit at her table and always have these kind of rich conversations. But I participated in making a film. I produced a film called Different with Ethiopian filmmakers Hassan Mehretu. And when Z and Mehretu and I met them actually at Aggie's place at a get together that she was doing for, I don't remember what it was for, but it was for something outside of art. It had to do with HIV. It was some kind of AIDS. I don't remember, but it was something to do with this health organization. And I met these guys there. We started working on this film. When the film was finished years later and I sent her an invitation, she was one person from that world that showed up at this screening for this film. That's Aggie. She just shows up. And ever since then, I've tried to show up as much for her, but there's always been this, she's just very generous in that way. And in terms of if you're in her space, if you're a person in that community, she shows up and comes through for you in the way that which is really rare. I think I've talked about that before, but so our relationship, and then we've had really wonderful conversations whenever we get together, but I find her fascinating as this really, as this person who comes from the Midwest and this city and raised this, these people like Kat and the amazing grandchildren that she has. So we've just it's been a great relationship, but it really developed, I think, through the Studio Museum and our connection there.
Kat, the way that you interview Aggie in this film is really on the sidelines. Like you're in the back of the car, you're in these intimate moments in her closet, in her bedroom. And then the artists, when they interview Aggie, are in these much more formal compositions. And I'm curious, did you learn something more from being able to eavesdrop on what artists and curators and journalists wanted to hear from Aggie that maybe you hadn't heard yourself?
Yeah, it was very cool how that came about, because I didn't start making a movie. I started with, I'm a kind of archive junkie, history and archives and bits and piece fragments and palimpsest and the texts and the letters and photographs and any bits of footage. So anybody who's seen Chavella knows that was built from this very short interview I'd done with her in the early 90s on a complete fluke when I was staying in Mexico City. And so I realized that Aggie, of course, hates the camera and there was no footage of her. And I thought I just wanted to record a couple interviews with her about studio in a school and about artists and about being a mom and things like that. So I had asked her if she'd do it and she said yes. And we were gonna do 5 or 6 separate hour interviews. And we did one and it was awful. It was so boring and we were both really stiff and she was uncomfortable and I was super uncomfortable. And there's only the very tiniest piece from that original interview that you don't even need to know which it is, but it's in the film. There's a tiny piece. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to bother doing this. It's miserable and nobody's ever going to look at it, including me. So I just thought maybe I'd film her with the kids because they always have these great conversations. Like she and Julie, do you believe in God or angels? We talked about this earlier, but do you believe in angels? And she says, no, but I believe in putti, which we interpreted in a lot of ways. But anyway, I sat down and I filmed her with the kids. And with the kids, I thought, I have no ulterior motive, no agenda. I just said, you guys, you can ask her anything you want for an hour. And they all wrote up these questions, separate themes and different days. And I filmed them just talking to her and it was so great. And I was like, well, we should do it this way. But by that point, I didn't have oh, we're going to talk about MoMA. We're going to talk about philanthropy. We're going to talk about, your siblings and your birth family and growing up in Cleveland. At that point, I was like, say whatever you want, which Julie can attest. I probably should have taken a little bit more of a heavy hand because I might have gotten some gaps filled. But in the end, I guess we got what we needed because people asked what they were interested in. And so we filmed, you know, she was like, I could talk to Glenn, I could talk to Julie, I could, you know, and I was like, great, let's do it this way. And literally I would maybe suggest start with how you guys know each other or how you met or something, just to get them talking. But some people wrote up questions, other people were very free flowing. But for me as a filmmaker, I really prefer the kind of like verite filmmaking, like you said, it's, you know, the fly on the wall filmmaking, the direct cinema, where there's not a lot of guidance and certainly no talking head interviews. And so in a way, I feel like these conversations, which Julia just so eloquently laid out why they're important, because Aggie is about community, she's about relationships, and these conversations are the prism of her life, you know. And so I feel like she's always in connection with people, which is why quarantine is so challenging for extroverts, and Aggie in particular, who would see maybe 100, 200, 300 people every single night. And to have to just see me and a couple of my kids every other night is not very satisfying. But to me, those those conversations really ended up being kind of like direct cinema. They were real things happening. And so when you say, you know, we didn't get the backstory, it's like, but you got the current story. And I was a very light hand. It was not, there was not a lot of direction and guidance. And in fact, you know, my fabulous camera team and my sound person, you know, as soon as we got there, they turned on the camera and they didn't turn it off till the end, which is why you have those moments with Dorothy and putting on the mic, and, you know, these little sitting down with John Waters, you know, before that hilarious interview. So I do feel like it was very much that kind of filmmaking, which I enjoy, which is to kind of step back and not do a straightforward, you know, she almost forgot, I think sometimes, that she was being interviewed. And, you know, as Julie also can attest, she asked a million questions back. And I recall her Julie trying to, you know, saying that incredible line that appears in the film that sets up that photograph of Aggie seated among all these older white guys. And Julie saying, you know, you've got queer kids and Black grandkids, and you're just, you know, you are who you are, and it's not like other people. And you see the people that she has spent, you know, the last 60 years around, you know, and it's like, she is not, like, when she's around this group, or me and Julie and our families, or the artists at the studio gala tables, or, you know, it's a very different group of people. So I learned a lot from the conversations, I have to say, and she would never have responded to me the way she did to Julie's questions or to anybody's. I do appreciate, and it happens in Julie's interview, that sometimes when she's answering, you'll see she looks at me. Yes. I'm behind the camera. There was always two cameras. I was always behind one. So sometimes we're using the other angle in the film, but there's all these times she's talking, and also poor Thelma. They started out facing each other, and I was on that camera on Thelma, and by the end of the interview, it was like this, and Thelma kept kind of trying to come and be in the, they were on a couch, and Aggie just was like, kept looking like she was trying to figure it out. So there was a way that we were all in dialogue. But I love that when she is trying to remember Pride and she's talking to Julie about that. And, you know, I mean, that's what I learned too, is how important those moments were to her growth, but also to her way of being a mother. And that's something I also have 4 children, and she had 4 children, and, you know, you try not to get in their way, and you try not to be too stable a rock, and instead be somebody who can grow and evolve with them and learn from them. And I feel like the film tries to demonstrate her growth. She's very different, you know, like as you say, Julie, she's Cleveland and New York. She's Cleveland in the 30s and 40s, a long time ago, and New York in the 2020s, and those are
yeah. And I meant Cleveland from like this source of this other connection that she maintains this connection with, but it comes from this other place in her, or, you know, it informs this place of her in her. And well, that was one of the reasons I was also interested in who her mother was and how her mother was, because of like how she is as a mother and how you are as a mother and how she is as a grandmother. Also being a mother, I'm just fascinated by the role of mothers all of our lives. But
so, Kat, you've outlined that Aggie almost became a collaborator with you on this film, but I don't want to undersell what you contributed. And you described your attraction to the sort of archive, this like continuous stream of footage. And I almost think of what you've done here as a sort of like bricolage, which I think is really super incredible and is worth us discussing and pointing out the way that you've used art itself as a way to tell the story of Aggie. And then obviously you also have like tremendous footage beyond that. And just how did you make sense of that? Is that all art in Aggie's collection?
Yeah.
What was the story? How did you build that?
I love that bricolage. I think of that. I don't use the word often, but I do think that that's sort of how the film comes across, because I feel like it is this feast of artwork, and the effort was, I mean, originally I decided to turn it into a film because she had started Art for Justice, and I can talk about that or not, but I thought it was this incredible thing to do, and I wanted to see how she became a person who would do that. And it's and how we all become who we are. Like, I also have these siblings, and they're not like I am, and you guys have siblings, and they were raised by the same parents in the same towns, and they're not exactly like you. Like, how do we become this person? She's not like her siblings either. And so there was a way that I wanted ultimately the film to show that Aggie sees the world through art, because I think that's the beginning and the end of everything she does. And to do that, I needed to use, if you think about it or watch it a second time, there's over 200 pieces of art in the film, but there's also poetry and literature and films and sculptures and paintings and drawings and prints and photographs. I mean, there's so many different kinds of artwork. And so when we came upon these moments of her remembering things or experiences, or her talking about how things felt, we didn't revert to archival footage or archival photographs, but instead we used art to continue to carry through those emotions, not to illustrate them, but to deepen them, so that they took you to a place that you didn't predict and that you hadn't seen and that you didn't already know, and that doesn't exist in archival photographs or film footage. And I love that. I mean, I can think of different places where she talks about that, but being in solitary confinement and those pieces that come up, which are not entirely doomy, gloomy pieces, which I think allows for the humanity of people who are put in these cages and buried alive. It allows that. There is still breath there. And I felt like, we weren't misusing the artwork by saying, this is what it feels like to me, what it pulls out in me. And then of course in the poem, and Julie's got some pieces, and there's a lot of the Art21. And as she said in the introduction, we were really grateful to the work that Susan and you all have done over time to make sure to find moments of artists doing their own work. So we had that whole poem as people making art. And yet Elizabeth picked that poem, I think partly because she was saying that's what Aggie feels like to her. Mm-hmm. So I think the layers of art, I think in the end, I just want people to come out feeling like there's a lot of potential that we have not tapped into.
Mm-hmm. That's
really the feeling that I got from the film. What I thought was really, because when I saw it that time that was screened at MoMA, I was, I was amazed with how it went to this place where you could leave with this feeling of what might be possible. And it was inspiring. It was this film that kind of then encouraged everyone, like, drop what you're doing and get involved in this project, get involved in this mission of justice, and let's figure this out. And I think as difficult as it must be to have the film screen right before a global pandemic, this summer and the kind of what took place after the killing of George Floyd and the immense rebellion and immense, revolution, if you will, and gesture towards that. And this effort is kind of the way the world has moved into, in a really kind of, in particular ways, moved towards an effort of reconstruction. And I think we're in the midst of that. And I think it's just interesting that this film was made or premiered right before this moment. it couldn't be more appropriate. And I really do think that what's interesting about it is that Aggie, it's not speaking to the college professors. It's not speaking to college students. I mean, it is a documentary of that, but the audience can be anyone who's like Aggie, or anyone who is outside of like wherever, like anyone who's not outside of those kind of the structures that are engaging with that kind of cultural work or cultural work of reform. And so that's something about the film that I found really interesting, that it started as this documentary about Aggie Gunn, but really evolved into this kind of very inspiring project around art for justice and what this project is. And it opened doors to Brian Stevenson's project. It opened doors, elsewhere, that showed you there are all these places where we can be potential, and where we can be, where of potential, all these spaces of potential, and where we can be very potent in how we interact with those spaces, but also how we can contribute to like inventing a different type of carceral system, to inventing and abolishing prisons, to the Abolition of Prison Project, how we can really move towards restorative justice projects. Like all of this becomes open in the film. And I didn't realize that would happen. I think that's pretty amazing about that done in the film.
Thank you. I mean, I love hearing that, Julie, because, I feel like too, that there's a way that for me, I knew this before, because even though we know and love Studio in a School, I feel like the radicality of Studio in a School hasn't been recognized as much as the radicality of Art for Justice. And there are a lot of different elements there. But to me, the through line for Aggie has always been about voices that aren't being heard, people who aren't being asked what they think, people who aren't being celebrated for their contributions or being stifled, literally not being, when Giancarlo, the grown-up student from Studio in a School, and he says, art class was the only place I wasn't asked for an answer. I was asked for my questions. I was asked what I thought about things instead of, what's the conclusion of this equation, or what's the interpretation of this paragraph. He said in art class was the only place I had a voice. Right. And I think that's what she's saying. She goes into prisons and, the whole system, carceral system, and she doesn't see criminals defined as the mainstream media perpetuates for centuries now, but she sees scientists who aren't able to work, and artists who are struggling every day to stay alive, using their art to keep themselves alive. And, she sees all the voices that aren't heard, not people that should be further shut up. And I think that's true actually even for women artists, that's how she saw women artists in the beginning, is how come these women have so much to say and no one will listen? No one will put them in the galleries. I take this artwork to the galleries and I say, here's a great person. I went to their studio and here's some really interesting work. Will you take a look? And they'd say, we can't because they won't sell. Their prices won't increase. So I feel like she's always, it's not even an underdog. It's literally a voice that's trying to be snuffed out that will not let go. So
in the film, Kat, there's this kind of moment where you talk about 13th in Ava DuVernay's film, and how Aggie didn't really want to go see it, but ended up going see it and had a sort of transformational moment. I guess, but I think about you and the way that you portray yourself in the film and bringing Aggie along to some protests in your youth. And I think about how you must have been so influential for her in opening her eyes.
Well, I think it's interesting. She certainly didn't want to go to 13th, as she tells Julie very clearly, as she's like literally clutching her pearls. She's like, I go to the bathroom during the scary parts of movies. Like she doesn't like violence and she doesn't want to have anything to do with that. Her going to, like I think of the article in the New York Times she read about the children being denied art classes, and going to the 13th as really being like these epiphanies. They weren't the moment she learned the things. It was the moment she realized she needed to do something about it. And I feel like that, there's not like a moment when I said like, you need to accept me because I'm a lesbian. Like, I grew up around the art world, there tons of gay men in the art world of my youth, not that it was talked about that way in any sense, but I think as soon as AIDS hit, when I was in college and coming out into the AIDS crisis, she was calling me up and saying, Robert Mapplethorpe, Robert's really sick. And he's somebody who, because I'm her child, he had like taken my photograph and I had met him with her and seen him around, and, Scott Burton and a lot of artists who were friends of hers. And she does not let go of a friend. I mean, some people say it's like Leos are loyal, but she is like the most loyal person, but it goes beyond that, because when I came out to her, there was never, she had some questions and she said some interesting things, but there was never a doubt that I was okay and that I was right about myself. There was never, I did not have very many friends at the time whose parents didn't kick them out of the house or tell them they couldn't talk about it there or deny ever acknowledging their relationships. That was how everybody was dealt with. So yeah, I mean, she didn't, I think in that way, it's like one of my kids said the most poignant thing to me, and it was actually with Lyle at the Museum of Modern Art screening. And thank goodness we had Sundance and MoMA and the Hammer screening. Thank goodness Aggie got to be at that MoMA screening for Doc Fortnight with so many people that she knows and loves. And, but one of my kids, Lyle said, everyone just keeps asking if it's you that made your mom this way. Is it your Black children who made your mom this way? And one of my kids just turned to me and he said, don't they realize that she made us? And I thought that was an extraordinary revelation, even for me, because I've been like put in this place, like explain why 13th, 13th and your Black children made Aggie start Art for Justice. It's like, that's not why Aggie started Art for Justice, but you're like constantly sort of bombarded with this very narrow understanding. There's a lot of people in multiracial families in this world now, in this country now, and certainly in New York City. Not everybody does something that's so alchemical, of like turning this art painting piece with intention. As James Baldwin talks about, it's like the intention behind the sale. It wasn't like a transactional experience, but I loved that because I thought, when obviously she and I are really close, and obviously I've had a big impact on her, but not a bigger impact than she's had on me.
Yeah, what a great way to turn that around. So we have, I want to open it up because we have some awesome people in the room, and we have especially enabled this call so that you all can turn your video on and unmute yourself. It's not a webinar. So rather than have me read the questions that are in the chat, can I invite those that have had questions or who have something new to say? You want to unmute yourself? Let us know your name and ask Kat or Julie the question.
Well, I have two comments. One is I absolutely love, my name's Jocelyn D'Annunzio, sorry. I loved her comments in front of the cupboard where her total humanity, as you kept doing reshots of it, and she couldn't get comfortable with it, but she was trying so hard to please you.
Yeah, and she tells me to just step back. It was a wonderful moment, and Jamie Bennett, who was her chief of staff at the time, was with her. And that night, now I'm not going to get all the details right, but I'll put some of them out, which was that it turned out she was getting getting that honorary award from President Clinton, the National Medal of Arts. And so she couldn't be at a very important dinner. And so we got her dressed in his clothing and set her up to do the thing. And then that was the night that Roy Lichtenstein died. And so she ended up not doing either thing. She had flown back from DC to try to go to the dinner. Anyway, there's like all this backstory that made that such a moving evening, because in that moment, all she wanted to do was be present at the event that she had been asked to introduce Jeffrey Bean. It was like a celebration of him, which is why she's wearing Jeffrey Bean's clothing. And he made a lot of clothing for her. And she really adored him as a person. And so she was trying to be in many places at one time. And so I loved that too, it was long ago. And I wasn't certainly making this movie about her at that time. I was just filming for her because I had a video camera. Not everybody had, like we do on our phones now. So she's like, Catherine, you have to come and film this thing and give the VHS tape to them to play that night. And it was just hilarious because she can't, actually there's a funny, for Sundance, we were asked to do like a Meet the Artist, this thing where we set up the camera and we talk about for a couple minutes making the movie. And when I was making that, I did the same thing. Like I was like, kept starting and being like, and then my friend who works in the office cut it together. So she starts our little Sundance Meet the Artist piece, starts with Aggie going, I can't do this. And then I'm like, I can't do this. And so it definitely runs in the family, but it's hard. She's not about preparing herself. She's about being in the moment.
I was surprised, one last question. I was surprised at her comment about guilt at some point.
It's interesting because I feel like she, as is her custom, she acts in a more dramatic, proactive way in response to something like that, more than she can talk about it. So if she were on the phone on the call and you brought up the guilt, she'd say, yes, I do. I just feel so guilty. But the fact is that she does something with it. I think she always did, to Julie's earlier question about her mother, I think she felt very loved by her mother. She felt like she had a great childhood. She was with these friends, were all her same age, her siblings, and she was with her mother. And losing her mother, I think, definitely is like this well of empathy in her. But I think that she has talked extensively about this Henry Moore, that she spent this money, she bought this piece of art, and it was in that confident sleep, and she thought, I'm just going to give it to a museum so everyone can see it. But it was also, she never made it transactional. It wasn't, I'm going to sell it back and get this money back. It was, and so, she's given over 900 pieces to the Museum of Modern Art and many to many other smaller museums and the Cleveland Museum and whatnot. So I think what's interesting to me about the amount of guilt she feels is how much she's acted on it. And that for me, as a wealthy, privileged white person, I have very little patience with like this wallowing in guilt over having too much privilege. So I think it's only valuable and interesting in as much as it leads to action. And we can see that, she did the deed. She like sold the painting, she started the thing. And it was like propaganda. Like she just put it out there. She didn't talk about it. She just did it. And so I try to get her to realize that she's acting on the guilt in a really valuable way. And partly I think that leads to her own survival.
Thank you.
We have a great question from Xaviera about justice. Xavier, do you want to ask this question of Kat?
Before Xaviera goes, I want to say that I don't know everyone who's on the call, but Xaviera, in addition to being a dear friend of mine and of Aggie's, is an Art for Justice fellow and could talk to us also all night about the importance of that work and her cute relationship with Aggie in the movie. We didn't even talk about dating.
Hi, Julie, who's also a friend. Hi, sweetheart. I just want to be quick. I just wanted to ask a question of Catherine, but I can also, Catherine and Julie both. My question is, and it's long, and I'm just going to read it. As someone who has seen many of your films in particular, I guess I'm talking to you more as like an artist to artist friend. I wanted to know if you could knit the themes of your films together. I know this is a long answer, a question, and look at them objectively as much as you can. And by doing so, what would you say is your particular vision of justice on a holistic level for the United States, especially given all of the themes that you've touched on over the past like 30 years? Could you tease out just a little bit of like what a holistic vision of the United States would be for justice? And I know including Art for Justice, but like beyond, like the whole thing, a global vision, especially as particular to the United States. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That I'm going to try to answer just some parts in a little bit instead of going on too long. But that's a beautiful question. I'm glad you have it written down. I mean, I would say that they're always a platform. They're always a diving board. That I feel like the work is about getting people to think and go further than they already have. So in something like the Elizabeth Streb film, Born to Fly, it's really to get people to access their own bravery. It's the same thing as Aggie. In Chavella, she's this phoenix rising from the ashes again and again, despite, you know, the neglect of her family, her alcoholism, you know, her unrequited loves, like all the challenges she faced in her life to keep going. And so I think it's the bravery, and then ultimately all of them, Dispatches from Cleveland, Samaria, Tamir Rice's mother, like, I think that my vision with all of them, and they are about all these different things in a way, but if you watch them, I think they all feel exactly the same. Like every time I come away feeling the same, which is trying to imagine an abolition, trying to evolve into an abolitionist society where we don't, you know, whether it's anarchy, and my youngest kid will now debate anarchy he's like a total anarchist, but anarchy is good. Like anarchy is about everybody chiming in and saying their piece. Julie, you can talk about it, but Tenzin will tell you why we have to have anarchy, because, you know, and that's the local, it really is. But to me, abolition, and that Art for Justice has become the most literal manifestation of this vision for me, because it's been there all along. I made a film and I was 21 years old at the beginning of, you know, during the AIDS crisis, up in the Bedford Hills Women's Prison, with women who had created an organization with Kathy Boudin and others called AIDS Counseling and Education. And the work that they were doing was all this same commune networks of care. How do we connect to each other and move into this world in a way that isn't demonizing some people over others, isn't being divisive, isn't functioning from a place of fear, which, as we all know, is the main theme these days. And that's the opposite of abolition. You know, abolition is not having prisons, not having a police force. And I know that can sound scary to people right at this moment, but if you actually follow it to its logical conclusion, if we are taking care of each other, if people have what they need, we don't need those things. So that may be, you know, too big a vision at the end, but I would say that's what everything's pointing to.
I would love to hear Julie, since I have the floor.
What's your uniting vision?
I mean, I couldn't agree. I definitely feel we have to have, like, something that has been one of my deepest, most terrifying thoughts is a human being locked up. Like, even, I just can't stand it. So once I was invited to go to the women's prison here when it closed, for the women, they were creating this project called the Women's Building, and it didn't happen. But just going into the prison was just so difficult for me. And you know, having come from a country where you don't have due process, and due process is not something that is guaranteed, and so I'm completely, like, these all of the ideas around abolition and restorative justice are ideas that I'm really interested in. About, you know, you have the projects around defund the police, but I've heard some really interesting thinkers who talk about refund the police, meaning refund a bigger kind of enterprise of practitioners who know how to work with social healing, who know how to work with trauma, who know how to work with mental health issues, and to really restructure what we do. But to really deal with that, we need a mega reconstruction. Like, all of these projects can't happen by themselves. And when I think about reconstruction, I think we need truth and reconciliation projects in this country. We are a country that has such intense scars of apartheid, of slavery, of inhumanity, and whatever we do to try and negotiate these issues without actually getting to the core of those traumas and that abhorrent history, and to come to terms with it and get somewhere. Even though South Africa is still an incredible mess, that project does something. And when you think about Germany and its effort at truth and reconciliation, even if that was a forced, imposed kind of effort of truth and reconciliation, there's nowhere like being in Berlin and seeing the Holocaust Memorial in the center of the city, and seeing the Holocaust Museum, and seeing Holocaust what is taught to every German student in school every day from when they're very, very young. Some parents even resisting young children having access to that kind of history of violence. So I just think that we have to really get out of the, like, we have so much work that has to happen in this country. And part of that is embracing, I think even to get there, is to embrace that we will live in a multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy, or we won't, and this won't work. And so we're really we're at such a crisis in so many ways, or such a crossroads, and there's a lot of work being done to undermine those efforts, not just on the street, not just in our homes, not just on how we're taught at school, but really from the bigger machination of what we are as a country. Will we be able to sustain this by becoming a multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy and really embrace that and be one of the biggest ones and only ones really in the world? Or will we not? Will we actually break apart? Will that project fail? And if that project can succeed, then we have a lot of work to do in terms of how do we make that just for everybody who's a part of that democracy. I mean, so I think it's a super incredible project and it's been hundreds of years in the making in a way, but we really need to be able to confront those realities with fervor and with intensity and intention, and and actually erase guilt in that. I think we have to get to a place where guilt is so many German post-war artists, not just German artists, all over the world really dealt with this issue. But I think it's really it can be in the Buddhist sense, it can be one of the most, useless forms of emotion and feeling, and action and responsibility and caretaking is way more essential. And I think in the end, that's what drives Aggie's work and who she is, to go back to that. And I remember when she talks about guilt, I think, how can anyone live in a time where you live in the midst of injustice, in whatever form of injustice, and not feel guilt? And how can we live in that way in the bigger global world? I feel the same way as an American citizen in this world, where the majority of us are first in the top 1% in terms of access to food and health resources and everything that, if you think about the rest of the world in the context of it, and we're just born into these situations. And because we're just lucky and born into this doesn't give us a right to humanity, and others deserve inhumanity. So fundamentally, I think that's a global project as well as a national project. Sorry for the spill.
You got me hooked, Julie. I'll follow you and Kat wherever you go. Thanks, Xavier and Jocelyn, for your questions. I think we have time for one more. I know Kat has prepared an extra special ending for us today. But is there anyone else that has a question that they'd like to ask, or a thought that they'd like to share?
Were there feelings about guilt? No.
So I guess maybe
wait, Marnie, are you trying to say something? You're muted.
I was going to say, yes, there are feelings and reminiscences and familiarity with the whole idea of guilt. It's everywhere in my family. And I hope I'm taking as much action as Aggie no one can take as much action, but we all can take some action. And thank you for this film and this whole program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marnie.
Yeah.
So what was
clapping hands? I love
before we cue up our ending, is there anything, Kat, you want to share about Aggie's response to what you made?
Actually, the film.
Yeah.
Great. She I think has become very clear and confident in her response now, which is that she feels like if anything is going to help end mass incarceration. I mean, I think like Julie, she cannot stomach it. And there's that moment in the film when Darren and she are talking, and she says, do you have anyone who doesn't think Art for Justice is a good idea? Because she's talking about how her peers have responded. And he says, of course, some people think this is a good system and people did something wrong and they should be put into jail, into prisons. And her visceral response is, have they ever been to a prison? And I have been to prisons with her, and it's, you know, you can't, I think she realizes that this narrative change that this film is a part of, because it's a part of the artists who are making change and the activists who are making change in this incredible community of Art for Justice family that we've been building over the last few years. I think she realizes that it's important that the word get out. And I think that what she said in her introduction to this is really key, is that she feels like people might take some of this movie with them into the voting booth, and that it might help us have a little more humanity and move towards a little more fairness and justice. Absolutely.
I want to say an extra special thanks to Kat Gund and Julie Mehretu for joining us today. Is the link still available, or for those, in case someone didn't see it, or is it, I guess it's, you want to tell us how we can see it?
Yeah, that'd be great. The film opens, we would have had a big opening all together, but Film Forum, our beloved, fabulous independent film theater on Houston Street, is having a virtual theater. So you can go to the Film Forum website and buy a ticket like you would to the film. And then on October 7th, they will start screening. And it's unique to Film Forum for a week. And then it will go to other national virtual theaters, as well as iTunes, Google, Amazon, Vudu, and Christina, anything else. And so there will be other ways to see it after that. But we would love you to support our poor, depressed friends over at Film Forum, who have been deprived of their entire purpose in being for the last 6 months. And so buying tickets really supports them, so they will be there on the other side, and we can go there and enjoy films again when that's safe. So that opens October 7th, but you can buy your tickets now, and then you'll be able to watch, I think, anytime in 48 hours once you start, or whatever it is. So please spread the word. We'd love more and more people to see it. And one fun thing for this audience, and I'll say it really fast, is that we also made a game. I wish I had it, because we have the prototype, but we sold it to Penguin Random House, and it will be coming out on April 15th. And it's a game that's really about looking at art and talking about how it makes you feel, and not necessarily knowing the artist's name or the year or the genre. And it's a looking and playing game, and you can play with like 5-year-olds, and you can play with 105-year-olds. And it's a really fun game. It's a little like Apples to Apples, but it's all art from her collection. Like you said, Tina, that the art in the film is all from Aggie's collection. And there are 150 pieces in the game, including one of Julie's and one of Xiveria's. And it's a fun game. So I hope people will extend the imagination.
What's the name of the game? How do you find it?
Words of Art. And you can go to the Penguin Random House website now, or Amazon, or Barnes & Nobles, or your independent bookstores. And you can pre-order that now too. It comes in a lovely little box with Carrie Mae Weems and Ellsworth Kelly images on the outside, and called Words of Art. So thank you.
What should we know about the song upcoming?
Okay, so the very end of the film, there is this song, the theme song that was written by Samora Pinder Hughes. I hope you'll listen to the words. It's really about imagination and leaps off from the bookends, which is Ava DuVernay's quote about how art and justice. I asked her what the relationship between art and justice was, and she said, really, they're just the same thing. They're both about imagining something that's not there, and then believing it can be so and working to make it so. And so in this song, it's all about imagination and how do we evolve to an abolitionist society? How do we get there to a more just and fair community and society? And so this is, the imagery is some from the film, but mostly it's from the recording session and the beautiful singers and musicians who worked with Samora and with my son Tenzin to make the movie. So feel free to leave at any time. It's about 4 minutes long. And I just think it's a nicer way to end the Zoom than the lights going out.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you so much. And
take
thank
it
you,
away. We're going to screen
Art21 and
share.
all of you for coming. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Production secrets. Into the unknown. Like wherever your note is, keep the notes. So we're gonna just do the same spot. Go full speed ahead. Okay, great. We figured it out. What is the measure of a life? What is our place in this design? I dream of a day when the truth is told, and the sign of our worth is in the hearts we hold. Can we see a path forward in the ink of the pen and the time that we spend? I will fly into the unknown. I will find ways to be free. Just imagine with me. Just imagine, please imagine with me. Is everything all set in stone? So many of us feel alone. I dream of a day when the borders break and we see the change that we all can make. Can we find the deepest courage in the lives of our friends and the things we can mend? I will fly into the unknown. I will find ways to be free. Just imagine with me. Just imagine, please imagine with me. Just imagine with me. Just imagine